All right, folks, it is a couple minutes past our start time, and we are going to officially kick off today's lunchtime conversation about what to do with the holidays and all that stuff, and how to manage grief and start new traditions. This is a topic that is, for me personally, very important. For those of you that don't know, I lost my mother nearly 7 years ago, and it was smack in the middle of the holidays. It made it especially tough and trying. Fast forward a couple of years later, and my brothers and I were at complete disagreement of how to actually honor our mother and her memory. Do we keep the same exact traditions and never change, or do we incorporate new traditions? And if so, how do we do that? While still, of course, processing the grief and the pain that came with it, while also trying to have a very joyous and fun time with our families. So that is, from a personal note, how Artifacts came into being, but also why we think this topic is important to discuss as we head into the holidays. I am delighted to have our two panelists join us this afternoon. We have Garrick, founder of Kitchen Table Conversations, and Rachel Donnelly, founder of Afterlight. Both are experts in the field of how to manage and process grief, and they're here to share with us their expert tips, tricks, and also hopefully generate a lot of discussion and food for thought for all of us as we head into the holiday season. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Rachel and Garrick to kick off the conversation. And Rachel, I think you were going to start first.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's such a pleasure to be here. And Garrick and I have had a lot of, not fun, but just it's been a real honor for us to sort of prepare for this, as this could be such a hard time of year for everybody and for all of us, especially in light of losing a loved one, whether it's your first holiday without a loved one or your 30th holiday without a loved one. You know, I lost my father when I was 16 and I was in high school, and then I lost my mom about 10 years ago. So holidays have been a little complicated for me, sort of in this disjointed family unit and not having both of them. And after my mom died about 10 years ago, my sister and I just couldn't bear to do the same traditional holiday. We very much always did the traditional turkey meal at Christmas, and with all of the sides, and it just reminded us too much of her, and it was just too painful for us. So we put our own twist on it, and we really said, you know what, let's create our own tradition to sort of start anew. So it's funny, my dad was allergic to shellfish, so we could never have shellfish in the house. So after my mom passed away, we said, even though he had been gone for years, we said, you know what, let's do crab legs for Christmas. We're going to shellfish it up. So we started crab legs for Christmas, and we've now done it with both of our sets of our children since they were little, and they love it. And they each have their own crab cracker that they use at Christmas Eve dinner, where we go and have a copious amount of crab legs. And I think it gives us something to look forward to that's different. We're still honoring, our parents and the old tradition, but I think it can be very hard for people to give themselves permission to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
Garrick, I'd love to get
that story. And Garrick, I'd love to have you jump in and share a bit about your background to kick this off.
Yeah, I come to you as a widower. I've lost my wife 4.5 years ago, and in this world today, I spend my time educating people on grief and mourning and how to navigate the wilderness of grief, which is particularly the holidays is very, very challenging. And so part of of what we face at this juncture, when we face loss, not having that person at the table with us, is that what do we do with these traditions? And I love what Rachel has done, is to add traditions. But that begins with, like, as you mentioned, it begins with giving ourselves permission to say it's okay for us to take and add, modify these traditions that we have developed in the past, but take them to another level, take them to something that not only serves and carries forward the tradition and the value and the importance that we've come to know and to cherish around those traditions, but also to imbue new traditions with those values by saying, listen, there's something different. Let's do this, and let's give ourselves an opportunity to explore. Because the more we give voice to these feelings, the easier it is for us to be able to face them. They soften, they become less overwhelming. But giving them voice is really where that begins. It gives us a chance to talk about it. And when we do, then we say, gee, well, what about this? What about that? Even so, one of the things that we, talk about let's to have a plan A and a plan B. So this is particularly around the idea of going to visit. So you think that, hey, listen, I'm not sure I'm really feeling like I want to visit. And the first and foremost thing is to make sure that when you're in grief is to honor your own feelings, because you're the one who knows best as to how you're grieving. No one else knows what you know. No one else it hurts like you do around this loss. And so to honor that, give yourself permission to feel what you feel, and to honor to the point where you say, listen, I may or may not want to stay when I go to visit, but I'm going to go with the intention of staying. But if I don't, I'm going to have a plan B. I'm going to have an exit strategy that allows me to say, gee, this is really okay for the moment, but I think I need to go. And maybe that plan B includes, well, I'm going to go back to the house or back to where I live, and I'm going to actually have something like, maybe I'll watch my loved one's favorite movie, excuse me, or have a favorite meal. But something that gives you an opportunity to have a way that you're not feeling stuck in an uncomfortable setting, because when you get there, who knows how it is you're going to feel. But the courage to get there is you've decided you have it and you want to do it, but you also want to make sure that you have a way to say, gee whiz, this isn't just right this time. The other thing to do is to consider the fact that, well, maybe we just cancel the holidays altogether, because they will come around again. There's no question about that. And this year, it may be a time for an opportunity not to necessarily engage in that kind of interaction with others. And so there's that permission piece as well. It's important to say, gee, even to that level, you say, well, gee, I just don't feel like doing the holidays this year. I don't feel like getting out the Christmas decorations. I don't feel like, getting the food and cooking. I don't feel like any of that. I feel like I just want to be quiet. I want to be to myself, or want to be just the family close by. So a couple of things that you might consider is an A and a B plan. And you can find more information about that at grief.com, David Kessler's website. And then you also have the opportunity to say, well, gee, maybe this year we don't do what we did before. And so we'll give ourselves a chance to look at it next year. Yeah.
That's some great advice, Garrick. And looking back on how my family dealt with my mother's passing, and I think the first year or two afterwards, had we given ourselves the grace to say, you know what, maybe not this year, or maybe we do things a bit differently, I think it would have been a lot less stressful on all of us. And probably it wouldn't have been as, I think, disharmonious as it might have been. So I'm curious, Rachel, what are kind of hearing Garrick's take on plan A, plan B, and of course, knowing that you all jumped into the new traditions, what is your thoughts or your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I of course wholeheartedly agree with Garrick, and want to echo what he says around that sentiment, that there's so much that we're doing after we lose a loved one. I help clients specifically manage the unavoidable logistics of losing a loved one, and there's so much fury of activity after you lose a loved one, of closing their lives down, getting rid of their tangible personal property, going through photos and items, that we may feel that pressure, that guilt around continuing on. And if we don't do the way things that they were done last year or before, that we might be letting our loved one down or not honoring them. And I think it goes back to giving yourself permission to do you, to honor yourself, to give yourself time to really grieve. Sometimes going through the process of settling a loved one's affairs, of course, distracts us, but then doesn't give us that time to really sit and really honor and miss our loved ones. So even if you do something completely, totally different this year, that's okay. It's not any better or worse. It's just going to be different, and you can pick it up next year or do something different, create your own tradition, go to Cabo for Christmas or something, or Hanukkah or Thanksgiving, or what have you instead.
Yeah. And how do you start having, Garrick, if you want to jump in first, but say, how do you start having those conversations with your loved ones? Like, how do you start that it's the first time it's a new tradition. Like, what does that look like?
I think that it really has to do with the fact that it depends on the family dynamic. You've got to be cognitive, of course, and sensitive to that not everyone is in the same place. And they could be all over the place. There may not be an immediate understanding of how to get to an agreement, but there might be just to say, the other day I was thinking that I wondered if we might want to consider doing something a little bit different this Christmas. Just a thought, wanted to see what your thoughts might be around that. And they said, well, gee, no, not really. We're going to do everything the same. That's the way it's going to be. So then kind of where you're at with regards to your family members in this conversation. Or there may be the conversation that turns to saying, well, what do you have in mind? What are you thinking? And so in this point, this point depends upon how far out in many ways, how far out you are from the loss, but there may not be capacity for being able to think of anything new and creative. And that's important to honor that, because it's important that we don't, set our feelings aside, but we actually give ourselves permission to feel them, because it's through feeling that we actually start to begin to heal. So you have to feel it in order to heal it. And that begins with, coming to a point of acknowledgement that the death has happened. But in the meantime, which takes a lot of time, and in grief time is much, much different than normal time. Once you've lost someone, time obviously slows way, way, way down, and your timing is very different than anybody else's timing. That's why here you are in grief, and everybody else is doing what they used to do, and their life is just going on, but you're here in this place, looking within yourself, looking at the things that you've, not only the major loss, but the secondary loss, as Rachel was talking about, all the things you've got to do in order to take care of afterwards, after someone has died. So it's important. But the conversation, as coming back to that, it's important for us just to find out where everyone's at, and then let them teach us as to how far we want to go in the conversation. I know we can go in and say, well, gee whiz, I got a great idea. Come on, everybody, as we gather around. And then, of course, we may have missed the mark because not everybody's even ready to even think about it. But if we make a query, we make make a conversation around what it is that where they're at, what do they think of the idea, involve them in helping you, then they may, you have a way of, that be your point of entry in the conversation.
Yeah, and if you're doing this for, perhaps you're trying to loop in another family member who you both shared the same loss,
Yeah.
and you're afraid, and maybe you're doing it on their behalf of your dad who's lost, your mom, and you're afraid he's not going to be able to bring this up. Give them the window to say, I really want you to know it's okay if we do something different this year, and let that sort of sit and settle with them. But give them that window so they maybe don't have to broach or open that subject. It may be too hard for them.
Create a bridge.
Yeah.
Create a bridge for have a conversation that to whatever level, but let them teach you, let the griever and the grievers in your family teach you what it is that they're ready for or not ready for in the conversation. Then you can go from there as to whether you want to pursue it or how far along, or maybe you yourself will start a tradition in your family that's different. One of the simple things that comes around about this too is that as the holidays, oftentimes people say, looms on the horizon, as if it's something that we've got to be concerned about and aware of. And of course we are, because our emotions we're very tender around this, is that when we do make a plan, it takes some of the anxiety out of what's ahead. Because anxiety as an emotion is there for the purpose of letting us know that, hey, we're not necessarily prepared about what's going on, what's coming up in the future. But that's also teaching us to say, hey, how do we prepare for that? Well, we can make a plan. We can make a plan. We can either have the conversation, we have a new ceremony. When Dr. Wolfeld talks about this at the Center for Loss and Life Transition, he's a grief expert, and he talks about the fact that when words are inadequate, we turn to ceremony. So there are many different ceremonies that we can actually create within the family. And one of my favorites is you have a candle, a main candle, a large candle, and everyone has their own individual candle, and the large candle is lit, and everyone gathers around and lights their individual candle from the big candle, and then they say a little bit about the person who's no longer there, not there physically, but certainly there in presence in everyone's heart. And so you get a chance to say, how you wanted to honor or cherish or memorialize that person, and you kind of go around the room, and sometimes you hear things that you didn't hear before, didn't know about the person before. but it's a wonderful way of honoring their and bringing their presence into the moment, because the love never dies. And the bottom line is it's really, they're here with us. They're just not with us physically. And that's not to minimize the physical part. It's just to be acknowledge the fact that they're not here physically, but they're forever in our heart.
I love that, Garrick. And I think the whole creating ceremony we had, I think it was last year, we had one of our Artifacts members write in to share with us something that she started doing after losing several loved ones in several consecutive years. And she now, during the holidays, she purchases these, I think they're clear glass balls, like for the Christmas tree. And she writes the name and a permanent marker of someone that she's lost. And they then hang it on the tree on Christmas Eve. So she now has, rather than feeling, well, how do they're not here, but I want to honor them, and making a new tradition, but also keeping them kind of front and center, like in the memory. We just thought it was a beautiful thing to do. And I'll share, she even made an artifact for it. So I'll share that in the chat for others to see that. But I think you're right. Sometimes words, you just can't find the right words. And you go back to ceremony and you find a way to express them.
It's a great point you're making too about the words, is that words come from our head. Ceremony speaks to our heart. And that's, grief is a journey of the heart. It doesn't respond well to logic and mental things. It responds by opening our heart. We respond to it as we go through our grief journey, by opening and continuing to open our heart with lots of courage, because it's very painful. But underneath the pain, we have to remember is the love. And so in all of that, it's like, well, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to, address this? Yeah.
So Rachel, I would love to hear a bit more about your story if you're willing to share with your family, how you came up with that new tradition. Was it easy getting everyone on board? Did you have to, drag some folks kicking and screaming? Like, what was that conversation like?
I mean, my sister and I were very much on the same wavelength of after our mom passed away, and we were then taking care of our uncle. And we said, it was just we were so exhausted from the year and her being sick. And we just said, what, we need to put some different energy here. And so I don't know if we said it simultaneously or we both just came up with the idea at the same time, but it was very much an enthusiastic yes. Because it was so surprising, because we came from such a family of tradition. We've always done the same thing. Our grandmother always made the same things. And if you did anything outside, colored outside the lines, that was just not going to do. So I think we really wanted to embrace coloring outside the lines and doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, I love the coloring outside the lines part. So in my family, when my mother passed, one of our traditions were always making these sugar cookies, and they even have the cookie cutters, these old antique cookie cutters. And it's one of my favorite traditions, and one that I'm happy to do every year for my family. But one of my brothers was very concerned I wasn't going to use the right cookie cutters, and that if I made the Christmas trees with red sprinkles rather than green sprinkles, that was not going to do. So literally coloring outside the lines. And at the time, my daughter was 5 or 6, and she's the one doing the sprinkles on the sugar cookies. I'm like, she made red Christmas trees. It's going to be okay. But I think it's that flashpoint where emotions do come into it. And grief is so often filled with emotion that to him, having a red Christmas tree rather than a green Christmas tree it was unheard of. And yes, we're going to eat them. Like, they're not going to see them in 24 hours. But it was very interesting just how little things like that. So I am curious if either one of you have advice for what happens if the family is not entirely on board with the new traditions, or some are, some aren't. How do you navigate that?
I mean, I think, go ahead, Garrick, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think we've done in the past where we have done, our own thing, and then had a separate celebration with family in the traditional way. But because you want to honor you want to honor where you're coming from and your headspace around that. So I think it's fine to blend both if at all possible. But like I said, while honoring yourself.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good question. I think it's important for you to stay true to yourself. At the same time, maybe not at the expense of others. If they're not there, if they're not able to find their way there, but you can, and you know that they can't, then I think it's through grace and compassion that you just simply say, okay, we'll do what it is that makes you feel right. So if you want the cookies to be red, sprinkles on them, that's okay. Because a lot of times people find themselves finding those specific things, very specific things, that at least that's something they can control. They couldn't control the fact that their mother died, but they can control the fact that and it gives you a sense of purpose. That in all the chaos in this world, at least I'm going to have red sprinkled Christmas cookies. And it's interesting. It's an interesting point, but it's like, well, okay, I get that. Sure, of course,
Yeah.
we'll make them red.
We'll
Yeah,
go with
we'll make them
on
red.
that one. We've got a question that's come in from one of our audience members. The question is, some of us have loved ones who are likely spending their final holiday with us. Strategies, to-dos, if nothing else, what? How do we be prepared without making them feel like we are just dwelling on what's to come?
That's a great question.
It's a wonderful question.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I miss having about, having both of my parents in my life is not taking the time, or that I didn't know that my time was limited with them, but really utilizing that time to really learn more about our family, past traditions, why we did things the way that we were, and really taking time to sit down with family members and talk with them, either by recording it or now artifacting it would be a great thing. And just not taking that time to really leverage in their perspective, their memories, their remembrance of histories. And so if at all possible, take that time to sit down with them and interview them. Talk to them, go through family photos and get them to lean into those. And maybe you'll hear stories you've never heard before. Maybe you'll hear the stories you've heard 1,000 times before. But even so, like, take that time, make it a habit of trying to do that with loved ones every year. Losing that historical knowledge and a background is just a real casualty. And I use that word on purpose when you lose a loved one.
The thing too in a situation like this is we're in a place called anticipatory grief. We're anticipating the death of a loved one. And sometimes naming it is helpful to realize that that's how we're feeling. We're both in the future, in the present, and in the past. And so what do we do? And oftentimes there's anxiety about the future because we know it's coming. So the idea is that, fundamentally don't attend the funeral early. And the blessing is that you have an awareness of the time that you do have, the precious time you have left, whatever that might be. And so by allowing yourself to be present in the future, in the moment, be here and now, then you are able to have whatever activities, whatever events, or incorporate, like Rachel's talking about, things that might turn into be new traditions. You can start them with this at this Christmas or this Hanukkah or whatever the Thanksgiving. So the idea is that be present and allow yourself to really enjoy the moment. And if you're going to add something that will help you in the future because you now have a recording or you have more insight, you have stories that you've collected, things that you want to artifact, then do that and make that part of a new tradition, but not a tradition because someone's going to die, but because we're all going to die at some point in time. So let's get this done now because it's important to be in the present, and the future will take care of itself. But really focus on the precious time you have left and making the best of it, the most of it, in whatever way that resonates with everyone who is involved.
Yeah, earlier this week, it was my birthday, and I did a blog post about why don't we treat birthdays like funerals? And what I mean by that is, why don't we take the time to say the things that we say at funerals to our loved ones on their birthdays, on holidays? Why do we, I wrote the speech, the eulogy for my mom's funeral. Why did I say all those things to her while she was alive when she couldn't laugh at the punchlines or, hear all the wonderful things that I thought about her? So if you want to steal that idea from me and say, I want to use this holiday to say the things that have never been said, please do. We never know what tomorrow brings. So why not use like Garrick said, the time that we have to say the things that you really want to say.
Yeah, have a celebration of life.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you hear people talking about memorial services, celebration of someone's life, which is wonderful. But what about moving that forward and saying, listen, we're gonna dive in here. We're gonna say the things that make a, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross referred to it in her book that she wrote with David Kessler on death and dying, as to be, and also she talked about this in on Death and Dying, the book that she wrote in 1965, is about we have unfinished business. So take care of your unfinished business early, not afterwards, but beforehand, but make it as in the context of having, saying the things that you would have normally said or waited to afterwards, but say them today.
And,
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could go wrong? Yeah. And, I also, this is going into it, sort of a different tip, but, I like to use holidays as an opportunity, a window opening to have those larger conversations, as sometimes sitting down, looking through photos, reminiscing, remembering holidays gone by can give you that opportunity to have those larger conversations. And to talk about, are your affairs in order? What scares you about the future? And really leaning in to make sure and ask how they're feeling about things, but to also share that you want to make sure they're being, that their affairs are taken care of, that they've got things in order. And maybe not that day, but maybe say, this is reminding me of how Aunt Mildred died, and she seemed very lonely at the end of her life, or she didn't have her estate plan in order. And it's made me really worried about you and another family member. And I'd love to, maybe not today, but down the road, let's sit down and have a talk about this. I want to make sure that you're okay.
Yeah. I think of the holidays too, we have a tendency to be more open because it's, for whatever reason, we come to the holidays and there's kind of this sense of, I don't know, but more connection, perhaps more openness to say, hey, we're sharing time together. We're coming at, and normally these are good times. And these are times where we have lots of good food or lots of good conversation, football, whatever the case may be. We're coming together as a group or as a family and sharing our time together. And so I love the idea of doing, people say oftentimes when I talk to them about advanced care planning, they're like, well, how often do we revisit this topic? I say, well, holidays are a great time to do that because you're all together. You're kind of a little more open than you may have been before because you're not busy. You're kind of taking some time off of work and you're there together as a family, and just continue to have those conversations during that time. And because the more we have the conversations, again, the more the fear goes away, it softens, and we realize that we've kind of normalized it in our conversation. And so it kind of like becomes a part of our, a bit of a tradition, as it were, to check in and say, well, how are all your paperwork in place, and all the things that you want, clarified as far as what you want done with your stuff, and so it's a good time. It's a good time.
I like to say that, at Thanksgiving, talk more than turkey. So talk about, more things than just turkey. Talk about have some larger conversations as you're sitting there artifacting your side dishes and the wine that you've had or what have you. Talk more than turkey.
Yeah.
Are there any good, easy conversation starters, switch the conversation from hey, that turkey was delicious, or how's the weather been? Or did you see that football game? How do you transition from the typical holiday talk to those bigger topics? What's an easy segue for someone that maybe
icebreakers,
sure of how to start?
I mean, I always like to, say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm worried about X, Y, and Z. So share some of your concerns. Use a recent story in the news of, someone who may have been a victim of elder fraud, or, you know, something that's happened recently, or use a cautionary tale of someone that you know that's in your life who's lost a loved one. They did not have their affairs in order. They did not write down what was important to them, and share that, say, you know, this happened to my friend Rachel, and it's maybe really worried, and I don't want that to happen to us. Can we talk about X, Y, and Z? And I have a great freebie if you want, and I'll share my contact information that you can email me, and I'll share with you to give you some conversation starters as that segue way in from, you know, so stay away from talking about politics, but you can talk other things. You can talk turkey, more than turkey.
Right. And that's a great way. You just find those, you know, I think I'm sure that the starter conversation starters you're talking about are really a way to kind of look at those and say, where's the common ground? You know, who you're talking to is, you know, those, and particularly those stories you're able to tell about another family member that went through something that didn't turn out quite well, and being able to say, I really just don't want that to happen to us. I really would like us to be prepared. And I really would like us to make sure that we know what each other wants. And it's so important to be able to do that, because here's the other piece of it that oftentimes people forget, is that if I don't know what you want and you're my loved one, and I make a decision and the outcome is not favorable, then somehow I'm going to walk away from that death with a tremendous amount of guilt. So you really unburden your loved ones by making sure you're clear about what it is that you want. And these conversations help us get clarity. And so these conversation starters are the beginning of that, and say, okay, now I now have a better understanding of what you want. And if you come back year after year, or in conversations subsequent to that, where you can reconfirm and reaffirm that this is what it is that you continue to want, you now have a new understanding of one another, a new insight into each other that really brings us closer together. So unburdening and bring us closer together is what results come from this conversation. And also relieving the griever from having guilt because they may or may not have made the right decision, because they didn't know what you wanted, but they did their best, but they still carry that, you know, oftentimes make their grief journey quite complicated.
And Garrick, I want to key on something you just said there about relieving the guilt. I think too, a lot of times during the holidays, there is a lot of guilt of, am I doing it right? Am I doing it how so-and-so would have wanted it to be done? Am I doing it in memory of? Do you all have any tips for how can you start those new traditions and let go of the guilt? Or how can you host the holidays or be part of the holidays? And how do you start letting go of that guilt if you have the guilt surrounding it?
You know, as my mama would say, pack your bags, we're going on a guilt trip. So no one wants to go on that trip, and we need to not go on that trip. So, you know, I think that there's so much guilt around, you know, when you lose a loved one, what you said, what you didn't say, what you did, what you didn't do. And that doesn't end after they're gone. That continues. And especially times that you've spent together around holidays, that can bring up so much guilt. And if there are traditions, if there are recipes, if there are items, if there are things that you do that no longer serve you, that are no longer serve your life, let go of that guilt. Give yourself the permission. And, you know, I hope my mother-in-law's not on this presentation, but she gave me a whole box of my husband's, these ornaments that from his childhood, even, you know, the old Christmas ornaments that had been made out of Play-Doh and that are falling apart. And I don't think she wanted to get rid of them. So she gave them to me. And now I have all these Christmas ornaments that are falling apart and do not serve me. I have my own ornaments that my kids have made out of popsicle sticks. So what I'm going to do is artifact all of these and then throw them away. Then I'll have the memory of them. They will be preserved. My husband and I can sit down and say where those came from, but then I'm going to get rid of them, and I'm going to give myself the permission to let go and go into the holidays guilt-free.
Yeah, guilt's a big one. I think that guilt is based upon the judgment that we have around whether we did something right or we did something wrong. So it's a mental construct we've created around, no, well, this is the right way to do it. this is supposed to be the way you do it. And if you don't do it that way, you're not doing it the right way, and you're not a good person. Well, that's not necessarily true. And so back to, when we feel guilty, we also might want to feel curious, turn to curiosity and say, where is that coming from? Where did I pick up along the way that there was a right or wrong way to do this? And somewhere along the way, you'll find that you picked it up from somebody else. And it may not be the way you look at it, but you've incorporated that into the way that you live your life. And you can undo that at the source and say, I don't want to carry that forward any further. I don't believe that to be true. I know I'm a good person. And whatever I did in the past, I did the best I could with what I had. And like Maya Angelou says, if you knew better, you'd do better. So when you know better, you do better, and then you can let yourself off the hook from all that judgment, because it's based upon, a judgment that necessarily isn't your own. So to give yourself permission to, like you said, let go of that, but you have to be curious about where it comes from in order to be able to let go of it. And so being able to be curious when you say, well, I'm feeling guilty. I wonder why that is. Where is that coming from? Guilt, shame, and regret are close cousins, and they all kind of come in a cluster. And so you can explore that a little bit and find the source of it, perhaps, and release yourself from that binding judgment that was passed at some point in your past.
Maybe there's not a right way or a wrong way. Maybe there's the Rachel way. Maybe there's the Heather way, the Garrick way, the Ellen way of doing things. Yep. So maybe if we get rid of that, which has plagued me my whole life, that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, but maybe you just make it your way, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We've got another question from one of our audience members, Rachel and Garrick. Any do's and don'ts for those freshly grieving who may still have all the stuff that their loved ones left behind?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one. Oh my goodness. So yeah, this is a
second part here. It can feel uncomfortable, and you can worry if they tell they are not doing well and barely making it through. You wonder if the stuff helps or hurts.
Yeah.
So helps.
So after my mother died, she had never cleaned out my grandmother's house, and the house had been in our family since 1890. I've actually artifacted it. If anybody wants to see it, it's public. And so it had been, generations and generations of my family who had been in that house, and things had never moved. It was like a museum to our family, and was really like the North Star of our family. And it broke my heart to have to clean it out and sell it. And I felt, I'm doing this wrong. Every family member whose presence and spirit is still in the house, it's judging me. This is, I'm not doing this right. There's so much guilt around it. And I took pictures. This is before Artifacts, but I took pictures of all the items, and to hold on to those memories. And I think there's so much guilt and sorrow and sadness and everything wrapped up in stuff. And people we don't realize that we're holding on to those because we think that that's holding on to our family member. And that if we get rid of that item, we're getting rid of them. We're getting rid of their memory. We're doing a disservice, a dishonor to them. It's so much more, it's about the emotion and the memory and not the object. And I, having cleaned out 5 houses after my uncle and my mother died, and now helping countless clients do this, I know how much is wrapped up into this. But give yourself permission. Just ask them, help them look at things from a third party view and say, is this helping you or is this hindering you? You can still keep the memory and get rid of the stuff, which I think is one of the mission statements of Artifacts. But that is so true, and it is so helpful.
Do's and don'ts for freshly bereaved or freshly grieving mourning individuals is important to take note of. And that the idea is that the things that they do have of the loved one, because some people say, well, as soon as they're done, get rid of it, clean out the house, be done with it, you'll be done in 3 weeks, we'll be good. And oftentimes, after that, there's a tremendous amount of regret for doing that, because those objects that we link to those individuals are comforting. Like taking your husband's t-shirts who's passed away and making pillowcases out of it, or wearing your mother's winter coat because it feels like she's hugging you. those are all invaluable ways of you continuing to mourn and to grieve and mourn the loss of your loved one. So, I mean, I didn't let go of my wife's clothes for over a year, maybe a year and a half, because when I would go there and I would open the closet and look at them and cry, I'm crying now, and cry and just be present with the fact that I would look at each bit of clothing and knew when she wore it, what she wore, what we were doing. It reminded me of what we were doing together when she was wearing that. And a matter of fact, I had an experience when I was walking into a grocery store and she was walking out. The challenge was, of course, that she had been dead for over 90 days. But she was walking to me for sure. And for sure, she had just gone to the grocery store. She was on her way home. That's where she's been all this time, for sure. And it was the same height, same colored hair, same blouse, same, pants. And so guess what? I went back to the closet and I found the exact same clothing that that woman was wearing, and looked exactly like my wife at the time. And that was very bitter, well, tragically painful, but at the same time, like a reminding again of the love that we shared, and it was teaching me how I could love her in her absence, because she's always in my heart. She'll never go away. She'll never not be there. But this was just one of those anchoring moments where it just said, hey, here you are, and your mind wants to believe that she's still here, but that's not possible because, she's not. But at the same time, these linking objects, i.e. the things that we keep of our loved one to remind us of them close at hand, are wonderful ways for us to grieve and mourn. I know that Dr. Wolfelt and David Kessler both have watches from their fathers. And when they're thinking of their fathers, they go over to the dresser, they put on the watch for that day. And they wind it up because there were bulbas and there were wind-up watches. They did not have batteries. And so they would wind them up. They talk about this with tremendous fondness and deep connection to their dad, because both their dad had made a significant difference in their lives. And so that linking object, they've kept for decades afterwards because it served them to continue to mourn. Because people say, well, gee whiz, how do we get rid of this grief? I've been at this 6 months. I've been at this a year. Shouldn't I should be over by now. And this is a question that people I hear ask David Kessler, and his response is, well, how long will your loved one be dead? And if your loved one's going to be dead for a long time, you're going to grieve for a long time. And so these linking objects help us navigate the wilderness of grief and actually interact with and allow ourselves to mourn authentically. So very important.
And there's no timeline to grief. Everybody's grief
No.
journey is different. It's not a linear process. And give yourself, it's not a cut and dry. Even if you take decades to get rid of their items or the items that came from your family, that's fine. I mean, there's no timeline for when you have to get rid of things. So do things in your own time, what makes sense for you, what honors your loved one in a way that you feel comfortable with. Sometimes when going through things, I would really look at the item and say, am I keeping this because of guilt or because I really want it and I really need it and it's going to serve me in my life? And if the answer was, the latter, then that would help me make a better decision.
There's time for a great deal of self-compassion. And maybe you have to learn how to be self-compassionate, because that may not be one of those skills you had before. Not right or wrong, just simply aware of the fact that, oh, I need to care for myself in a better way. And this certainly opens up the opportunity for you to say, I'm not going to, there's no criteria for me. There's no timeline. There's no race to get to a finish line. That's really letting myself off the hook and saying, well, I've got a task to do. Grief is not a checklist item activity. It's something we engage in as we find it, as it comes up in our life. Sometimes it's overwhelming. Sometimes we feel we're doing well, and then we have a grief burst and think, well, I'm not doing as well. But it's very recursive. It's circuitous. It's not a straight line. There's no linearness to grief. There's the 5 stages, or the 6 stages. David Kessler added the 6th stage of grief called finding meaning. But the idea is that they're just kind of guideposts along the way, kind of identifying what you might be feeling along the way, but They're not meant, they never were meant. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said this all the time. This is not linear. Although when they came out, people thought, well, there is something linear here, and we're going to jump right on it because our mind's going to solve the grief problem. Well, again, your grief is something that you do with your heart. It's not something you actually can do with your head. So
beautifully said, Garrick. We've asked for any additional questions from the audience, and I think absent having any other questions, we'd love to hear your final thoughts of how, any advice for members as they approach the holidays, they're looking around at traditions or looking at stuff, anything that they can do to make it easier or to be more kind on themselves, or even just incorporating other things into what always had been. Love to hear your final thoughts on the topic.
Sure. Is there anything you want to add?
I guess there's just allow yourself to be where you are. Be in touch with your feelings. Allow yourself to feel what you feel and let them guide you in your journey towards the holidays. And what you decide you want to do is okay. Because as we've said before, it's not a right or wrong way to do this. The way that's to do this is in your own way, at your own time and at your own pace. So honor those feelings and honor that what your emotions are trying to teach you at this very, very tender time.
I now approach all my decision making with two questions. It's either a hell yes or a hell no. And so if I can see myself getting rid of something, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. If I look at, doing a new tradition around the holidays and that feels good or doesn't, then that's how I make the decision. So it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be, very hard decisions. You can just use those sort of parameters to help guide you. And by staying true to yourself, I think that can be an easy way to do it.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Garrick. This has been a very enlightening conversation. And I wish we had had this conversation years ago, personally, for myself and my family. I will be sharing this conversation with all of my family ahead of the holidays as a friendly reminder that it's okay to give ourselves grace. We do want to, again, thank Rachel and Garrick for joining us. If you're looking to reach out to them directly, we popped the contact info into chat, but Rachel can be reached at myafterlight.com and Garrick can be reached at kitchentableconversations.org. Check out their resources, their web pages. Both are tremendous advocates and I think helpers in dealing with grief and after loss. We'll also be adding this video to our YouTube channel. That link is also in chat, so you can rewatch the recording. You can also share with friends and family who couldn't make it today. And once again, we thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful holiday season and that today's conversation and tips will be able to help you as you navigate through that with old and new traditions. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Thank you.